Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. I'm your host, Alan Somerton. I'm saying my name because I want you to understand how petty I am going to be today. And you can attach that pettiness to my name. Because today we're talking about the college football playoff semifinals. The Michigan Wolverines versus the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Washington Huskies versus the Texas Longhorns. We're primarily going to be focusing on the Michigan Alabama game because at the end of it, a lot of people are saying, oh, this is a classic. This is a great game, down to the wire, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to yada, yada over the best part this time. Alabama was gifted their spot in the College Football Invitational, as we like to call it now, around these parts. And it showed. For all the resources dedicated on ESPN from all the pundits, outside of a select few, saying that Jordan Travis going down and having Tate Rodmaker and or Brock Glenn, got tongue-tied there for a second, having one of those two guys starting, FSU is not the same team. That Texas was ascending. That Alabama was ascending. They were all peaking at the right time. And do you know what peaking at the right time got you? Peaking at the right time got you production from a quarterback in Jalen Milroe. 16 of 23 for 116 yards. They had around 90 yards at halftime. Yes, the score was 13-10. But Michigan did everything in their power this game to give it away with their special teams play. The muff punt in the first quarter basically gave Alabama that touchdown. And Michigan almost blew the game with that final kickoff return or punt return where the kid fielded it inside the 5, fumbled it, picked it up on the 1-yard line and got tackled into the end zone. But since he was on the 1, counts as forward progress, so it wasn't a safety. All these blunders aside, Alabama was manhandled at the line of scrimmage today. Well, not today, yesterday. Like I said, 90 yards of offense in the first half, 288 total yards. This is an Alabama team, ladies and gentlemen, that is not lacking for talent. On paper, this is one of the most talented Alabama teams according to the 247 composite rosters, and is only exceeded by, I believe it was the 2022 Alabama team. So it's not for a lack of talent. It's just something's missing. And something's been missing all year with this team. They lost by 10. We've touched on this numerous times. And we touched on this on the 13-0 podcast. On that episode, we talked about the many miscues of Alabama this year. But we'll recap it briefly. Lost by 10 to Texas at home. And they were pushed around the line of scrimmage. Struggled 17-3 against USF. Struggled and barely beat a 4-8 Arkansas team, 28-24. Needed a miracle against Auburn on 4th and goal from the 31 to beat them. But everybody hung their hat on that Georgia game. Listen, everybody's allowed to have a bad game, except for Georgia, apparently. I feel bad for Georgia, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, because they lost last. FSU didn't lose at all, but that has already been touched on. Even though, this is a petty podcast. FSU never lost. The only thing they lost was their starting quarterback. And apparently that makes all the difference. Georgia is one of the best 4 teams in the country. But unfortunately, they lost last and they got punished for it. And unfortunately, you have the head to head with Alabama. But this Alabama team had a month to prepare for this game. And this is what happened. They didn't trust Jalen Milroe to throw the ball. 16 of 23 doesn't sound bad. But we have to add the context of the other statistics. He averaged 5 yards per completion. His QBR was 45. If you really trusted this kid, you would have opened up the playbook more. And the few times that they did, he didn't execute. With all the talent that's on this team, as stated earlier with the 24/7 rankings, the composite rankings, they don't have electric playmakers. And when I'm talking about that, we've talked about this numerous times. Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper. Those are some of the talents that have come out over the past decade plus in this program. Jermaine Burton's supposed to be their best wide receiver. He's a transfer. He came over from Georgia. And their best wide receiver didn't even have 800 yards throughout the season. Isaiah Bond might be special in a year or two, but right now, there's just nothing there. This O-line, which was supposed to be the strength of this team this year, struggled with pass blocking. The crazy part is, too, is you could see some of the effectiveness in the second half where they really seemed to lean on the running game. Chase McClellan, 14 carries for 87 yards, 6.2 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. I get that Milroe is your best playmaker when it comes to that electricity that I'm talking about that's lacking with this team. But why was this team put in this position? All the pundits, all the resources said this team was ascending. They had a month to prepare. As Booger McFarland said, it is a travesty to this sport that FSU was not in the college football playoffs. Listen, I get the argument for Texas. I really do. But Bama gets in because of everything that's happened in the past. Not what happened this year. That's why FSU didn't get in. Because everything that happened in the past few years and not this year. I know I'm supposed to approach things with an analytical perspective, with an unbiased point of view as much as possible when it comes to these general episodes, rather than focusing on UM and FSU. But let's be clear, folks. I believe that even with Tate Rodmaker, this would have been a much better game if FSU was in here. FSU, I should have let that simmer for a little bit, but I'm really not, because I know people are just going to react to that in a weird way. And when I say weird way, they're going to, scrunch their faces, take a step back and think to themselves, Alan, how can you say that you're not unbiased with this? I'm not the only one saying this. There are people who follow the sport, different media outlets, who agree with this, who have stated this outright. I mean, think about it. What I just say about all that stuff about playmakers. Think about, and this is in the context of FSU making the playoffs and not the team that you saw face Georgia this weekend that lost 63-3. Because I know people are going to bring that up. And again, we always have to add context to this stuff. Factual information. Someone tried to do the math on the production that was lost by FSU for that Orange Bowl game. 97% of their passing yards this season and Tate Rodmaker and Jordan Travis were gone. 73% of their receiving yards, 91% of their rushing yards, 59% of the tackle for losses generated, 45% of tackles, 40% of their pass breakups. It's not always about quantity, it's about quality. When you're losing your two shutdown corners, and when I say shutdown corners, again, factual information, PFF, Pro Football Focus grades, graded them out that way, and Ronaldo Green and Jerry and Jones. You are missing out, obviously, on Jordan Travis and Tate Rodmaker. You are missing out on Jared Verse. You are missing out on Braden Fisk, on Fabian Lovett. There's a lot of talent that was missing. That talent would have been playing. And I even touched on the people I'm going to touch on right now. Because what I'm going to say here is think of the explosive nature of this offense. Trey Benson would have been playing. Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Jaheim Bell would have been playing. On paper, we just spoke about Alabama and the talent that they have. But in terms of execution, those group of players have infinitely more playmaking ability than what Alabama had to offer in this game. Who on Alabama can compare to Keon Coleman, to Johnny Wilson? Alabama does not have a tight end that compares to Jaheim Bell. And I'm not saying that Jaheim Bell is a first round pick, that he's on Brock Bowers level or anything like that. I'm talking about comparing what's on the roster for Alabama to what's on the roster for FSU and how they have executed this season. Who's been a better runner on Alabama than Trey Benson? Let me know. All that, you got Dallas Turner, who's going to be a first round pick. You've got Kool-Aid McKinstry. You got, what was the other kid? Caleb Downs, another young kid in the back end. Sure, you've got talent's going to be drafted in the first round. Absolutely. But the defensive unit at FSU would have caused a lot of problems for Michigan. That inside of Fabian Lovett and Braden Fisk. Come on, man. Jared Verse and Patrick Payton coming off the edges. Come on, guys. Bethune and Deloach in the middle at linebackers. Akeem Dent, Shaheem Brown over the top. Again, you got Green, Jones, Fentrell Cypress, Zaire Thomas. Come on, guys. And again, I'm not saying this like FSU is producing first round pick after first round pick after first round pick. I'm just using the stats that are in front of me. Again, trying to approach it from an unbiased point of view. But Jared Verse was a man on a mission over the last few games and put up exceptional numbers in terms of QB pressures, hurries, sacks, tackles for losses. Monster. Kalen DeLoach is one of the best rushing linebackers in the country. I mean, DJ Lundy would have stayed here, and he's one of the best linebackers against the run in the country. There's a lot of talent that would have stayed here. And a month for them to prepare. Adam Fuller's defense, the way they execute in the second half. FSU would have capitalized on those types of mistakes from Michigan, and they wouldn't have let up. Oh, man, this is frustrating thinking about those cowards at the College Football Playoff Committee and what they took away from this team. This 13-0 2023 Florida State team. Cowards. I'll say it again. I said it multiple times in the previous one. Alabama could not move the ball against his defense. Sure, they made some second half adjustments. They finished with 288 total yards in the game. 288. Come on, guys. We really think FSU wouldn't have topped that? That I mean, put it this way. Brock Glenn, with all the opt-outs that they had against Georgia, do you know how many passing yards he had? Again, we'll go back to remind you, Jalen Milroe had 116 passing yards. Brock Glenn had 139. Without, he was playing with third, fourth stringers on the offense. Come on. And we'll get to the Texas game in a second. Quinn Ewers wasn't much better until the last 10 minutes of the game. But again, 288 total yards. Do you know? I mean, oh man. Again, it's just that's with your starting quarterback. The one you've had all season, the one that crowned himself a Heisman winner after the Auburn game. That's just crazy. But hey, kudos to Michigan. Don't get me wrong. Michigan finally took the next step. They've been Big Ten champions 3 years in a row. In the previous 2 years, they've been embarrassed in the college football playoffs. And they finally broke through. And then now they're in the championship game. This has been culminating for a few years now, where, Jim leaned on his brother in Baltimore and said, hey, I need to change up my defensive scheme to beat Ohio State. The Don Brown thing works for a few games, but it doesn't work against Ohio State. And he hired, was it Mike McDonald, who's now the coach of the defense of the Ravens? He hired him for a few years, and then he got another kid that used to work under John Harbaugh, and he installed that continuation of that defense. And you're seeing the difference. They've been able to handle Ohio State over the past few years. And then, again, my opinion on the Big Ten is well, at least as of this year. Next year will change when they incorporate the Pac-12 teams. The Big Ten is basically a 3-team conference where you have Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. Every other team doesn't really come close to what those three have to offer. Michigan doesn't really get tested when they go up against, the likes of Iowa, who can't field an offense. They don't really get challenged when you go up against someone like Rutgers. You got Northwestern, Purdue, Wisconsin rebuilding right now and changing the way they completely play offensive football under Luke Fickell and Phil Longo. Kudos to them for what they've done. They bullied the bully. But Florida State would have made that game infinitely more entertaining, and it would have been more eye-appealing in my point of view. And again, it is very, very unfortunate. And I'm talking about this from the sense that they would even have Tate Rodmaker. I'm not saying Jordan Travis. because if those are the teams that showed up, FSU is. I mean, we'll get to that in a second. But moving on to the other game, real quick: Washington Huskies versus the Texas Longhorns. Again, going into the fourth quarter, Quinn Ewers, 13 of 23, 159 yards, 0 touchdowns. Once they had to really start slinging the ball in the fourth quarter to play catch up, he did finish with 318 yards and 1 touchdown. He didn't have his first touchdown until about they scored, I think, 7:25 left in the fourth quarter. That's when he got his touchdown. But this defense was absolutely lit up by Michael Penix Jr. 29 of 38, 430 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 carries, and 31 yards, 461 yards of total offense. Slicing and dicing that defense like it was nothing. Everybody thought Texas, with its defensive line, would have been able to dominate, and that just wasn't the case. They gave up 532 yards of offense to Washington. Again, 430 in the air, 102 on the ground. They also had 10 penalties for 66 yards. Yes, they had an opportunity to win it at the end of the game. But this game wasn't particularly close. Washington just played it really safe, and Texas almost took advantage of it. But who would have thought that the two teams that lost in the regular season, that went 12-1, lost again? Can't imagine if we had, an undefeated team in there, what would have happened. A team that had one of the best defenses in the country. A team that was one of the best units, offense, defense, special teams. Now, that's the thing about that Michigan game that we kind of didn't discuss from the FSU point of view. Michigan had some blunders in special teams. FSU has one of the best special team units in the country. Their punting game is really, really good. The kicking game is really, really. They've only missed, I believe it was 2 or 3 field goals this year. So Fitzgerald and Mastromano were just amazing, and they're coming back next year, which is going to give FSU an advantage. So, again, just watching this from the lens of what could have been, how we were robbed of not only a spot in the college football invitational, but we were robbed of seeing this team prove its worth, prove its mettle. So, again, these were good games. There's no doubting that. It's just, the next day, the day after, it's about processing the what if. What if FSU made it in? As they should have. And to be quite honest, I think Georgia should have been in. But unfortunately, the head-to-head does matter. I think if you wanted better games than what were put on this weekend, you would have Georgia and Florida State in there. But hey, don't have to worry about that, right? Because we're going into a 12-team playoff next year. So that'll solve everything. Trust. Trust the College Football Playoff Committee. Trust the people who are in charge of this game. The people that have been slowly destroying it with backwards thinking and not forward thinking of anticipating things to come like NIL, the transfer portal, the idea of bowl season, the way it's currently constructed. in combination with the college football calendar of the portal being opened, of early national signing day basically being the new signing day over February, just convoluting everything. So, again, wrapping up this petty podcast, FSU would have been national championships, or FSU would have been national champions. And I say that with the unbiased point of view that I've been offering, of course. But that's what I believe. I believed it would have been a lot more entertaining to have the two teams that faced off in the Orange Bowl, the carcasses of those two teams facing off in the Orange Bowl, actually being at full strength in the College Football Playoff Committee, or the College Football Playoffs. Odd take, I know, considering it was 63-3, but we already addressed all that. That being said, moving forward, we're probably going to do some episodes on the transfer portal for updating the QB situation there, see what's going on, as well as people they've signed and projected visits for the month of January. And do the same thing for FSU, see who's coming in, possibly who they might be getting, who they need, different things like that. And ideally, we'll be covering what's been happening with the Dolphins. I know we haven't put up anything lately with Miguel and Eric, but hoping to put something together because it's kind of looking rough at the end. So thanks for stopping by for this podcast, folks. Really appreciate you listening. Have a good one, folks, and we'll see you next time here on 305 Insights.